the truth awaits in the dark. True story.
300 meters below the surface of the North Sea, the water is pitch black, freezing cold, and heavy enough to crush a military submarine. To survive down there, human beings have to live inside tiny, highly pressurized metal tubes for weeks at a time. They eat, sleep, and breathe in an environment that is constantly trying to kill them. But what happens when the one thing keeping that crushing ocean out suddenly fails? Welcome to the Verdict Files. Today we are unlocking the police vault on the most gruesome and catastrophic deep-sea accident in human history, the Byford Dolphin disaster. But before we dive into the freezing darkness, I need a quick favor. Please invite the like button to go on a deep-sea scuba diving trip with you. But right before they jump backwards off the boat into the dark water, secretly replace their oxygen tank with a tank full of angry, venomous wasps. Also, if you have the nerve to explore the darkest mysteries of our world, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Now, let's descend. The year was 1983. The location was the Frigg gas field in the Norwegian sector of the North Sea. The North Sea is notorious for its brutal weather, massive waves, and freezing temperatures. It is one of the most hostile environments on the planet. Floating above this dark abyss was the Byford Dolphin, a massive, semi-submersible offshore drilling rig. It was a mechanical beast, drilling deep into the ocean floor to extract valuable resources. But to maintain the equipment at the bottom of the ocean, the rig relied on a very specific, highly dangerous breed of workers: saturation divers. To understand the sheer horror of this incident, you must first understand the psychological and physical nightmare of saturation diving. When you dive deep underwater, the pressure forces the nitrogen in the air you breathe to dissolve into your bloodstream. If you come back up to the surface too quickly, that dissolved gas forms bubbles in your blood, causing a lethal condition known as the bends. To avoid this, divers must undergo decompression, slowly ascending over hours or even days to let the gas safely escape their bodies. But oil companies could not afford to wait days for a diver to decompress after every single shift. So, they created a terrifying solution. They built pressurized living quarters right on the deck of the oil rig. These chambers were pressurized to match the exact pressure of the ocean floor, hundreds of meters below. Divers would live inside these metal tubes for weeks at a time. They ate, slept, and breathed under massive atmospheric pressure. When it was time to work, a pressurized elevator called a diving bell would attach to their living chamber. The divers would crawl inside the bell, the doors would seal, and they would be lowered directly into the pitch-black ocean to work for hours. When their shift was over, the bell was pulled back up and reattached to the living chamber. The pressure always remained the same. For weeks, these men were effectively trapped in a pressurized alien environment, right on the surface of the Earth. They could look out a small porthole and see the normal world, see the sky and the birds, but they could not step outside. If the seal broke, the pressure difference would kill them instantly. On November 5th, 1983, at exactly 4 a.m., a routine shift was coming to an end. 4 divers were involved in this operation. Edwin Coward and Roy Lucas were resting in the main living chamber, known as Chamber 2. Meanwhile, Bjorn Bergersen and Truls Hellevik had just finished a grueling shift at the bottom of the ocean and were inside the diving bell, returning to the rig. Outside the chambers, operating the massive clamps and doors, were 2 experienced dive tenders, William Crammond and Martin Saunders. Their job was to safely connect the diving bell to a short tunnel called a trunk, which connected to the living chamber. The procedure to attach and detach the bell was strict, precise, and unforgiving. It involved multiple steps that had to be followed in the exact right order. First, the bell is attached to the trunk. Second, the pressure in the trunk is slowly increased to match the extreme pressure inside the bell and the living chamber. Third, once the pressure is equal, the divers open the heavy metal doors and crawl through the trunk into the living chamber. Fourth, they close and lock the chamber door behind them. Finally, the tender outside slowly releases the pressure in the short trunk, allowing the bell to be disconnected safely. It was a delicate dance of physics and engineering, a dance that had been performed hundreds of times without a single issue. But at 4 a.m. on that freezing November morning, the dance was interrupted by a fatal, unexplainable mistake. Bergersen and Hellevik had crawled out of the bell, moved through the trunk, and were just entering the living chamber. Hellevik was the last one in. He was in the process of closing the heavy metal door of the living chamber from the inside. The door was almost shut, but not fully locked. The pressure inside the living chamber and the bell was 9 times higher than the normal atmospheric pressure outside on the rig. At that exact terrifying moment, the dive tender outside, William Crammond, made a catastrophic error. For reasons we will never truly know, before Hellevik could lock the chamber door, and before the pressure in the trunk could be safely reduced, Crammond unexpectedly released the massive metal clamp that held the diving bell to the trunk. The result was not just an accident, it was an explosion of physics. A massive 9-atmosphere pressure differential was instantly exposed to the normal 1-atmosphere pressure of the outside world. The explosive decompression was so violent, so incredibly powerful, that it defies human comprehension. The heavy diving bell was blown violently away from the chamber, striking the metal walls of the rig. The air inside the living chamber rushed out through the partially open door, seeking to equalize with the outside air. The change in pressure happened in a fraction of a second. Inside Chamber 2, Coward, Lucas, and Bergersen were instantly exposed to this explosive drop in pressure. The nitrogen gas dissolved in their blood violently expanded. Their blood literally boiled instantly. They died in less than a single second. It was so fast that pain receptors in their brains did not even have time to register what was happening. But for Truls Hellevik, the man who was standing right at the partially open door, The fate was something straight out of a horror film. As the massive pressure violently rushed out through the narrow gap in the door, it created an unimaginable vacuum force. Hellevik was caught in this invisible, unstoppable current. He was forcefully drawn through a crescent-shaped opening in the heavy metal door that was barely 60 centimeters long. The violent physical forces tore his body completely apart, expelling his remains across the metal deck of the rig. Outside, the dive tender William Cramped was killed instantly by the blast of the heavy bell flying through the air. The other tender, Martin Saunders, was severely injured, but somehow survived the horrific ordeal. In a matter of seconds, 5 men were dead, and the deck of the Byford Dolphin looked like a war zone. The immediate aftermath of the disaster was chaotic and cruel. The oil companies and the authorities rushed to find an explanation. Initially, the blame was placed entirely on William Cramped. He was the one who released the clamp. They labeled it human error, a tragic mistake made by a tired worker at 4 a.m. They tried to close the book on the Byford Dolphin incident as quickly as possible. But the families of the victims refused to accept this simple explanation. They formed an alliance and spent decades fighting for the truth. They argued that a system as dangerous as saturation diving should never rely on a single human action to prevent total catastrophe. There should have been fail-safes. There should have been interlocking mechanisms that physically prevented the clamp from being opened while the chamber was still under pressure. Years later, a rigorous independent investigation finally revealed the chilling truth. The equipment on the Byford Dolphin was dangerously outdated. The locking mechanisms were flawed, and there were indeed no fail-safe systems installed to prevent the exact mistake that Cramped made. It was a ticking time bomb. The investigation also revealed that Cramped, despite his experience, was working under extreme exhaustion in a highly stressful environment. In 2008, the Norwegian government finally published a report taking responsibility for the lack of proper safety regulations at the time. The families of the divers were eventually awarded compensation, though no amount of money could ever erase the horrific way those men lost their lives. The Byford Dolphin incident completely revolutionized deep-sea diving safety. Today, saturation diving systems are equipped with advanced interlocking fail-safes. A clamp simply cannot be opened if the pressure is not equalized. But this safety was paid for in blood. The deep ocean is a world that humans were never meant to conquer. It is a dark, freezing abyss that tolerates our presence only as long as our metal machines hold together. The moment a seal breaks or a clamp is released too early, the ocean reclaims its territory with absolute, unforgiving violence. The next time you look out over the vast, calm surface of the ocean, remember the men of the Byford Dolphin. Remember what happens when the fragile barrier between humanity and the crushing depths suddenly vanishes. Thank you for watching this investigation. If you survived this deep sea dive, make sure you hit the subscribe button to join us for our next case. And tell me in the comments below, could you survive living in a pressurized tube for weeks at a time? This has been the Verdict Files. Stay safe and keep your doors locked.
The truth awaits in the dark. True story.